welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am Jessica, your host, and I am here with the author of a book that is definitely going to be staying with me for a long time. And it's one of the books that I was able to read very quickly and told everybody about the minute I finished reading it. Welcome, Christine Murphy. Tell us about Notes on Surviving the Fire.
Hi, Jessica. Thanks so much for having me. So this is my debut novel out with Knopf, February 25th, and Wildfire internationally, the same date. You know, I wanted to write a fun, page-turning thriller. I wanted it to be crass because I'm crass. I wanted it to be funny because I'm funny. But I also wanted it to do a couple of really specific things. I grew up watching 80s action movies. I love me some Die Hard, some Predator. They're all so good. But, you know, they almost always only have men. And I thought, is there any way I could do like an old school underdog, no CGI, no alien saving the universe, like an awesome revenge story, murder mystery, action book, but starring a woman, and what would that look like? And then I also wanted to see if I could do some serious things with it and actually look at sexual violence systemically, look at give a realistic portrayal of the trauma after rape, but do it in a funny way. I was like, can I do that? Can I talk about trauma in a funny way? I was like, ooh, I don't know. And then like throw in a murder mystery plot, and you know, there's like car chase and all sorts of good stuff. And so that's what I tried to do. It's a wild ride of a book. I had a great time with it. I was thrilled Knopf picked it up. They published my all-time favorite literary novels, and I think they really understood what I was trying to do with it. So I'm really honored by their association.
And it's got a really interesting protagonist named Sarah Common.
Mm.
Really interesting name. Curious just where the name came from.
So common is a bit of a nudge, might be a little heavy-handed, but essentially the idea that she's an everyman. So much like, again, the old school 80s action heroes, they were like normal dudes, right? Thrown into extraordinary circumstances. But also she's common in that the majority of women experience sexual violence. So this is very much just a day in the life of a typical woman is probably going to involve sexual harassment. And then Sarah, she's named after a very dear friend of mine.
So Sarah, she studies Buddhaology.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that, because I think like one of the things I really enjoyed about this book also is that you play a little bit with academia and a little bit with just kind of that whole world, which I'm not sure how to say it. Like it's very much in its own little bubble in a way. And it was sort of fun. I mean, I know several people who come from academia. I know several people, or is it academia? What should I be?
You know, who knows? Whichever one you pick, someone in academia is going to correct you and tell you to say academia or vice versa.
I see that when you just said it, you kind of like mixed the two. So
I know.
that's what I'm going to do from now on. That way, nobody can get mad at me
I
in
picked the middle path.
academia.
Well, my background is academia. Now I'm self-conscious. Academia, whatever. I have a PhD in religious studies. I do refer to myself as a Buddhologist because while the degree was from the Department of Religious Studies, my focus was on Buddhist studies. And Buddhologist is such a fun word. Like, damn it, I wanted a fun word. It is a real word. I did not invent that word. And I have spent a lot of time in academia. I have two master's degrees, one from Oxford, very hoity-toity. And the book I decided to situate it in academia because there are systemic issues of oppression and real vulnerability in class structures and power structures that are very much entrenched in the system as a whole, in much the same way that sexual violence is really entrenched in gender dynamics as a whole. So I found a lot of parallels there. It mirrored a lot of my own experience. I'm from Northern New England. My PhD was done in Southern California. I did not have a funding package. I was like waiting tables and tending bar and teaching yoga, like anything to make ends meet. Whereas I had colleagues who, got multi-year funding packages, had advisors who were just writing them $500 checks. And so the sort of obvious discrepancy in our paths, where in theory, there we are in the same place, working towards the same degree, but the writing was on the wall as to who would really have a chance at a career because they could afford to go to these conferences. They weren't working 40 hours on top of their academic work, so they could work towards publication. And who, like in my shoes, let's be real, like I finished that PhD by the skin of my teeth, and a professorship was just never a viable option for me. And unfortunately, I think, the question of academia, like higher ed is in due for a reckoning. And I think my book really tries to look at that in a realistic kind of inside out way.
So getting back to the book, because I could ask you so much, I could literally just talk to you about that because to me, all of that is very interesting. So Sarah had been raped quite brutally by somebody who is known in her field as such a great guy.
Mm.
He's awesome. He's a great guy. Wonderful. And obviously that goes as it often goes, where, like the onus is always on the survivor, the victim. And, well, was she drunk? Did she, how did she react around him? And it's infuriating because this is what you always hear about. And then you hear about, like, was it Brock Turner, like
Mhm.
20 minutes of action ruining his, like,
Yeah.
what is that even that they said ruining
Yeah,
his
his
life?
father
And
said
it's like,
that.
yeah, like, well, what about the woman whose life he ruined? And Sarah is, she has her best friend Nathan who is in a program with her. He is celibate, but he does lots of drugs with Sarah. And he's been her rock since all of this sort of destroyed her life. She goes to her therapy group with the others who have experienced this violence. And it's all about just sort of kicking the can down the road to, whether or not these people are going to actually see any consequences for their actions, which is usually no. But Nathan turns up dead, and that is sort of where the crux of the murder mystery comes from. And, while obviously this is very painful for her, this also brings into question a lot of other discrepancies. He comes from an extremely wealthy family. And there's some things about him that she didn't know. So I guess my question really is, can you talk a little bit about, without giving too much away as to what she finds out about him, just this idea of a woman finding a man who supports her through this, and then in death, which is she's reeling from, starts to sort of piece through his own life and has some questions, let's just say.
Yeah, I think it's one of those, I think it's a very human experience, to be honest, to feel like we really know someone and then something happens, whether we learn it about them passively or we witness it, where we realize maybe we don't know them that well. It reminds me a little bit of the conversation that has been happening since the Me Too movement. Like when you find, okay, Neil Gaiman, let's go with that. If you love the work of someone, and it means so much to you, and you grew up reading his books or listening to his music, and then you find out that he has been accused by multiple people of horrendous crimes, what do you do with that? My opinion is there's no right or wrong answer. If somebody said to me, if you go on my Instagram, there is a photo of two Neil Gaiman books in my toilet as I am flushing it. That is not the response of everyone. But if somebody said, I can't watch that TV show anymore. I can't read those books anymore. I completely understand. At the same time, if somebody said, well, I don't know the guy and I love the art and it means a lot to me, so I just separate the two, that kind of classic adage, separating the artist from the art. I understand that perspective as well. And I think when it's closer to home, the uncomfortable truth is that human beings do contain multitudes, and whether they are monstrous in one area and lovely in another, or they are just kind of disappointing in one area, they don't live up to the high standard we were hoping for them. I think that's just kind of the reality of being a human. I often think a lot of these men who, during the Me Too movement, were outed as like serial pathological rapists, a lot of them had kids. And I was like, here's a thought. Maybe they're great dads. Like, what do you do with that? Do you, and I'm not saying they shouldn't be punished or like locked in prison or whatever, but like, can you say someone is absolutely a monster and just, write them off when the truth is they probably have really wonderful parts to their personality and it's messy. And I wish that weren't the case.
Absolutely 110%. And God, I have my own feelings. I absolutely, adored a lot of his work, and I, I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to separate art from artist sometimes. But it is also, well, like you said, like what do you do with that? But I grew up with parents of the 60s, and like John Lennon was the best person ever. But like when you look into a lot of his personal actions, he did some really crappy things. And like it was very difficult to sort of live with that, and also like having been brought up thinking that this person was basically a god. But I think that that is the human experience, and sort of, just on that level, maybe idolizing somebody and putting all of your faith in somebody and thinking that someone is the picture of perfection is not necessarily the healthiest for us. But for Sarah, she really needed Nathan, and not having him in her life anymore, it pulls the rug out from under her, and she not only has to confront some of the people who were involved in the violence to begin with, but she starts to let other people into her life. And that was also really fun. I liked her voice too, I have to say.
Oh, that's actually my favorite part of the book. Her voice came to me like that. I had an idea of the plot. I was like,
Mhm.
well, like maybe this could happen, maybe,
Mhm.
but her voice was right in my ear. And in earlier drafts, the feedback I got was, "Yo, this chick is angry." Like, and I said, "Yeah, yeah, she is." And the response was like, "Oh, anger's tough because it can be quite wearing. Like if you're operating at 110%, the reader gets kind of numb. Like it's kind of
Yeah.
like when you have, when you're watching a movie and they have like a big battle scene and then they'll kind of pause it and there'll be either like a flashback or the soundtrack will change. So it's like classical music in slow motion and then it's back to the battle scene. Like one of my challenges was how do I keep this authentic voice, which is angry and crass and unlikable, right? Like women have so much pressure to be likable. And I was like, I don't know if Sarah and I would really hang out. Like I'm a pretty mellow, friendly person. And like, yo, she is angry. And so what I did was I upped the humor. So I was like, I said, look, we can't make her less angry. That doesn't work. But I was like, but we can make her funnier. So I tried to make her just really funny in her way, which was kind of crass, right? Really inappropriate. She says jokes that I'm like, oh dang, Sarah. We'll see if the editor will let you do that. And then I have some really lovely scenes of flashbacks. So even though Nathan does die, I think on like very early on, right? It's not a spoiler. In fact, I think they put it on the back of the book. I was like, okay, well, he really is a presence in the novel throughout. And then scenes with her father from her past, Mrs. Sanghera. I really wanted to include moments of love and lightness for her, even if they were memories, because, again, you can be in a really shitty time in your life, surrounded by douchebags, but you probably have people you can, if only through memory, remember that you love and felt love with.
That is a really beautiful way of putting that. I also wanted to ask you a little bit about there's a lot of flashbacks in your book to hunting and Sarah hunting with her father. How did that sort of come about? Are you from a hunting family yourself?
So I am not from a hunting family from myself, but I am from northern New England, and I grew up around hunters. I had a neighbor who was a big bow and arrow hunter. He'd go out in the woods and they build a platform, and he would just like it was kind of wild. He would pee in a jug, because he'd be up there for like 24 hours for deer, and so it's a culture I know pretty well. I've been around it. I personally don't know it. And again, I really wanted that like old school back in the day action hero, and I was like, she needs a superpower, but I don't want a superhero. I want her to have a superpower, and I say this with respect and affection because there's a part of me that really enjoyed my time in California, but Southern California and Northern New England are probably as damn different as you can imagine. I have lived and worked in over 100 countries, and without a doubt, Southern California was the most foreign of any place I'd ever been to. And one of the ways in which it's so foreign is food. Everybody's a vegan or gluten free, and they have all these like allergies. And I'm like, do you actually have an allergy, or is this like code for diet? And grass fed, free range, blah blah blah, and like the reality of like where food comes from, it kind of cracked me up because of course all the major, like most of the major condensed farming farms in that like feed America are a lot of them are in California. And as somebody who grew up around like small New England farms, those are not farms. Like those are, I don't even know what to call them. And so hunting was not something anyone knew anything about. And I thought, now that would be really interesting if she grew up tracking animals, hunting animals, not just target practice, but really understood how to hunt and how to kill, but doing it for food, not as like a kooky hobby or a sport, but she grew up, she had to do it. And I thought that could be a really interesting, again, quote unquote, superpower of a normal person that I could play with in the book. And it makes her potentially very dangerous. Like she actually knows how to kill things.
Yeah, for sure. It was great. And there's other things I want to talk about, but I'm not going to do it because I don't want to give it away.
I know it's so hard.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it really was. It was okay.
It's
It was a
really
really
hard to discuss like a thriller with like reveals because I'm like, no, don't say that. I know it's tricky. It's tricky.
It was a really good book. I really liked it. I tore through it. Obviously, if you have stayed this far into the interview, trigger warnings abound, but it is really good. It's very much worth reading. I have to ask you, did you know all the plot points when you went into reading? Are you a super plotter? I do not like the word pantser. I do everything possible not to use it. I use the words
Mm.
chaos writer, MacGyver writer,
Oh, I love that.
discovery
MacGyver writing.
writer. MacGyver writer is my favorite,
That's
but I
a
have to,
great one. I'm gonna
right?
steal
It's
that
like I'm
MacGyver
gonna
one.
put my characters into a situation and they have like a toothpick, a rubber band, and a paper clip, and they have to figure out where the
Love
bomb
it.
is. And like to me, that's like so much more fun than saying pantser.
It's funny. I get asked this a lot. Okay, here's what I'll say. The truth is I don't know. I don't know. And actually, I'm now working on my second book, and I'm in the same headspace. So I guess, so in writing, sometimes we talk about writing towards islands. Like you have sort of, okay, I want the inciting incident to be that. And then I know how I want it to end. And like, I picture this scene and I picture that scene, and you kind of like string it together and like figure out, you're like, well, shit, we have to get from here to here. So, okay, that'll happen. And remember, I remember, this is the first book I published. It is not the first book I have written. And when I was querying an earlier novel, I had an agent write back to me. They requested the full, they read the whole book, and they wrote back. I've never forgotten this. This is like burned in my memory. The response was, I'm going to pass. You're a beautiful writer, but you don't know how to tell a story. And I was like, oh, rude. And that was years ago. That was like 15 years ago. And I later read, I think it was, I believe it was a murder mystery writer who I was reading an interview with her, and she said something like, if you wanna write a plot, you gotta like murder mysteries are the most difficult plots because first of all, kind of like romance, they have a really big following. Like people love a thriller, and so people who read thrillers often read a lot of them. And so, they know what to look for. They can spot the red herring. They're like, I see what you're doing with that. So you have to be really smart readers who understand the genre. And I thought to myself, well, since apparently I don't know how to tell a story, damn, I'm going to write a murder mystery because I will give myself a crash course in how to tell a story. If, according to this interview, it is the most difficult story to tell. Now, I don't know if I agree with that or not, but that was definitely like what was presented in that particular podcast. Then, I was like, God damn it, we're going to do this. We're going to trial by fire. We're going to learn how to do this. And in my current book, I have an outline of the story. What I don't have is sort of how I'm going to tell it, if that makes sense. So with this book, I had her voice. Her voice, Sarah, was right in my ear and like, meh, 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 meh. And I was like, okay, dang, okay, girl, well, all right, oh, God, back off. I'll write the book already. That's really what it felt like. And I had a few, again, and I can't go into details without giving things away, but like I had things that I knew needed to happen. And I had things that I knew could not happen in order for me to realistically convey higher education as it is, instead of this very popular, like dark academia trope that is very popular in fiction. And it's lovely and it's fantastical. And I really enjoy reading that, but it is totally disconnected from what it's like to actually be in academia. And similarly, sexual violence, like we see sexual violence all the time, but it is portrayed in a way that usually serves the plot, and it is wholly unrealistic from the lived experience. So I was like, all right, there's things that I can't do plot-wise if I'm going to hold true to like trying to portray those two things in any realistic way. So it was, I think a lot of the story, I was like, a little bit MacGyvering, because I was like, well, it would be really convenient for the plot if this happened, but that would never happen in reality in the world I built. So we can't have that. And then I had to kind of, MacGyver myself between, I had to MacGyver myself between islands. How's that for a description of the writing process?
That's amazing. I love it. Well, I will read anything you write.
Oh, aren't you sweet? Well, we haven't sold the second one yet, but the goal is to, no, you know what? I don't want to jinx myself. I'm not going to
do it. Don't do it. We're not going to do that. We're not going to jinx.
No jinxing. We're in process.
Well, check out Notes on Surviving the Fire by Christine Murphy. It was really good. Definitely a unforgettable character and unforgettable plot. So good job.
Do you have a favorite scene or line? I always love, I don't know, anything that stuck out without spoilers.
The only thing, what I will say is, and this is not a spoiler, I really like that Sarah, her nicknames for everybody.
Oh yeah.
Like just every single nickname she has for everybody is hilarious. And I can see them in my head because I'm like, yeah, I know a Flopsy. Totally. Like Flopsy exists everywhere. Why are there so many Flopsies in the world? And I think I would have to kind of go with that. But then like also the climax of the book was pretty amazing.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed that.
Because I wasn't expecting all of that to happen.
Yeah, I did have one reviewer who was like, yeah, it's really good. And then that final act is wild. And I was like, yeah, that's like, I don't know.
Action movie.
That was me having a lot of fun.
That was the action movie. I mean,
yeah, that was the action. I told you I wanted a little, this is my tiny Rambo. Like,
I like it.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.